Welcome to this week's edition of the Dugout Dish podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. We got a request from a listener via Instagram. Wanted us to break down what coaches look for in catchers. So we're going to cover that topic, but we're going to take it a little bit deeper. We talked about the pitching piece of it recently. We're going to take some time to kind of break down some of the things that coaches are looking for from a positional player standpoint. I think we could probably start off with catchers. One of the things I do want to note off the top here is that any generalities we make, you got to understand that what we're going to say is going to apply across programs, but within each individual program, the barrier to entry is going to be different, right? You know, you might be saying that you're looking for guys who can, really run. Well, the definition of really run for an ACC school might be different than, being a plus runner at at a really good Division III school. And just understand that it's hard to capture it at all three levels in a timely fashion. But any of the topics that we touch on and what coaches are going to look for in different positions, they're applicable across the board. Just the level at which you need to be able to execute certain stuff is going to be different from program to program. So that's my one caveat off the top for the listeners is that each individual program is going to have specifics that they're looking for and styles of player that they're going to be looking for. So I'm going to kick it over to you. You're the catching guru. Let's start off with catchers and talk a little bit about what coaches are looking for and what they're honing in on when they're evaluating catchers.
Sure. I'm not a guru, but I appreciate the sentiment. I think for catchers, and it can be relatively straightforward. And then you get rather nuanced in what it is that you're looking for from a program standpoint. I think everyone knows where I stand on pop times from a recruiting standpoint. For those of you that are new to the podcast listening, I despise pop times from a straight up recruitment standpoint. I obviously understand why we do them. It's the only category and metric that we can really come up with in a showcase setting for us to be able to quantify what guys are capable of doing. Can you get eliminated based off of a pop time from a recruiting standpoint? Sure. If you're going to roll out a 2.7 or a 2.9, you likely don't have the athleticism to be able to catch at the next level. Now, that said, not every 1.8 is legit 1.8. I mean, I'm seeing things get released on Twitter where we have 12-year-olds that are 13-year-olds that are 1.7s. Come on. JT Realmuto isn't even a 1. He's a 1.8 in game. Come on. What are we doing here? But fundamentally, when we start breaking down catchers and what it is that we're doing for a recruitment standpoint, we want to make sure that guys can receive the baseball, right? It's the first 5 letters of the position. It's catcher. You have to be able to catch the baseball if you want to succeed at the next level from a positional standpoint of being a catcher. If you're the starting catcher, you're going to catch in excess of 200 balls that game. You might block, depending who's throwing, you might block 10, 12, 15 times. The college game, you might throw 2 to 3 times in game on stolen bases. And there's more nuance to that. And, if there's a guy who, if they pick right and they steal on a breaking ball, that guy might be a 1.6, 1.7 to the plate, and you might not have a shot to throw that guy out. So there's the pop time becomes something when you get to the college level of, you like to say a barrier of entry. There is, Certainly, but that's not going to get you recruited. You could throw 1.9s all day long, but if you can't catch the ball, you're never going to throw in college. Like you have to catch and throw. So your ability to be able to receive baseballs and present strikes and steal strikes behind the dish and give the pitchers on your staff the confidence to throw to you because A, you can catch and B, you can block are far superior to anything that's going to be on a stopwatch because most people are going to look at it and say, okay, if he's athletic enough behind the plate, we can go ahead and we can teach him how to throw a little bit faster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know if you were posing a question to me or
I mean, it was kind of rhetorical, but
yeah.
I wanted the validation. So I think that, from a catching standpoint, obviously, like if you can swat from behind the dish, that's something that is obviously going to help you from a recruiting standpoint too. But for the most part, when we're just breaking down defensive things, especially in the middle of the field, your catchers, your shortstops, your second baseman, your center fielders, you're going to rely a little bit more heavily on defense there. And from a catching standpoint, especially at the next level, and you can go watch this. There's this week, we're recording on the 17th. It's President's Day. There's baseball games every day this week on ESPN Plus. Go watch some of these catchers. They're strong at the point of contact. They're not getting blown away on fastballs. They're able to catch and actually present balls to umpires. Now, we can go on and on about how we're catching nowadays on one knee and the like. And it's a trickle down effect from the big leagues, but the fact still remains. You want a guy who's athletic behind the plate who can move. He has hip flexibility, and the fact that he's going to be able to block baseballs. His feet are going to be able to move so that we can throw to second base or third base, whatever it might be. And the biggest thing I think that kind of gets overlooked is the ability to be able to command a staff and be able to command a game. Because at the end of the day, you're one of two players on that field where everybody's eyes are on you. And you're going to have to start making decisions on balls in play and being able to understand the game, your baseball IQ, at the catching, at the Division I level, really at the college level, not even just Division I. Like your baseball IQ as a catcher has to be higher than pretty much everyone else on that team because you're involved in damn near every play. From cuts and relays to bunt plays to first and thirds to pitch calling. All of those things are going to be run through you. So your ability to be able to operate at a high level from a baseball IQ standpoint is paramount for these guys getting to the next level. But ultimately, when we break down the fundamentals, it goes down to you have to be able to receive, you have to be able to your pass balls have to be limited, your errors have to be limited, you have to be able to block baseballs, and tertiary is being able to throw. And I know that goes against everything it is that people want to tell you from a recruiting standpoint, but I can pretty much guarantee you that anybody in college baseball does not recruit anybody solely based off of what their pop time is. It gives you a tiny little snapshot into, yeah, he's got some arm strength, might be athletic behind the plate to be able to get that off. But A, I want to see it in game, and B, I got to see him be able to catch and block baseballs because we have guys who have plus stuff, and he's got to be able to handle that.
I had a scout tell me once upon a time that the best catches are the ones that you don't even really notice are there. And the reason he told that, because I asked him, I was young when he told me this. I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, if you don't really even notice that the catcher's there, that means balls aren't going to the backstop. He's quiet, he's confident, he's able to receive, and the game is able to flow because, to your point, the catcher's kind of the engine of it all, right? The tempo of the game, like the catcher can dictate tempo. If balls aren't going to the backstop because you can block, if you're quiet behind the plate, it probably means that your positioning and your ability to receive the baseball are probably pretty good. And to your point, it's where it all starts, right? We've all coached guys who have hand cannons, and like if you can get the total package, like that's what they're looking for at the highest levels. Like, yeah, you do need to be able to really throw, but to your point, if you can't do the catching and the blocking, if you can't do the receiving and the blocking, your throw tool doesn't really factor in that much. And at the end of the day, it's not a big it's not what's going to be the deal breaker for most schools, right? Is they're not nitpicking over, 1-9 versus 2-0 if one guy can just really catch and one guy's okay. The decision's made pretty simply based on their ability to actually defend the baseball. For me, outside of the tangible stuff, and I think you nailed all of that, catchers have to have a motor and they have to have a presence. They have to have a presence. Um, for me, the motor's huge in all the positions, but I think that you can get away with it in other positions, right? You can be a little bit more of a relaxed guy if you're an outfielder or, a corner infield type. But for me, a catcher, he's got to have some energy. There's got to be a vocal component to it. Like he's got to command a little bit of respect. He's got to have a little bit of a presence. There's nothing worse than a catcher who doesn't have any pep in his step. And it's one of the easiest ways to cross a kid off from the catching perspective is a kid who doesn't have energy because you have to supply the energy as a catcher. You don't get that break that everybody else gets. Your brain your brain is functioning throughout the whole game. You're either calling pitches, which believe it or not, some coaches still let guys call. But even if you're not calling pitches, you still need to be in tune with exactly what's going on. Being able to read swings, being able to communicate to your pitching coach or whoever's calling pitches on where a ball missed, how it missed, and be able to have that information. And you can't do that if you're a low energy kid. So for me, that was a huge thing to try to evaluate from a catching standpoint is there some presence there? And does he have a good motor? Because you just can't function at a high level if you're a low motor guy behind the plate. I just don't think it's really doable. Um, but the catching position all fundamentally starts with the catch, the receiving and the blocking. Throwing's a bonus. Yes, there's a barrier to entry at every level. To your point, you're not getting recruited if you throw a 2-7, right? But a 2-1 or 2-2, like that's not a deal breaker. I actually really honed in on accuracy, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, you can throw freaking pellets, but if you don't throw it in the catch zone, or probably more appropriately called the slide zone,
Tag
you don't
zone.
you don't have any chance of getting anybody out anyway. So accurate throwers who are 2-0, 2-1 guys in game, they throw a lot of guys out, man. Because that when you get into college, much of the running game is controlled by the pitcher. Guys aren't not running because a guy's a great thrower, right? There's very few catchers on the planet that shut down a running game because they're that good of a thrower. You can count, there's probably a handful of guys like that in college baseball right now. There's only a handful of guys in the big leagues that are like that right now, where they're such good throwers that it deters you from trying to run. Most of the time it's a math game. How long does it take the pitcher to get the ball to home plate? How long does it take the catcher to get the ball to second? If the dude on first can run his what 78 or 76-foot sprint, right? Depending on the size of your lead, if he can get from there to second base faster than the pitcher can get it to home and the catcher can get it to second base, you have an equation that works in your favor. And that's what coaches are working off of, right? And they're trying to factor in pitch counts. That's where the running game becomes a little bit nuanced, but most of that's going to fall on the pitcher. And, to back to your point, like if you're not accurate, all the arm speed in the world doesn't really do much. So it's the combination of those things that make a guy really effective. But if you can't check those first two boxes, it's going to be tough to recruit you, and that's where most guys are going to hone in. Is can you catch and can you receive comfortably? And I think it's always really good to see a kid catch a college quality arm, right? Because it's easy to sit back there and look good if a guy's throwing 77, right? But how are you reacting to an 88-mile-an-hour fastball that doesn't end up where it's supposed to end up? What do you look like trying to receive that ball? Can you block a good slider in the dirt versus that loopy 66 mile an hour one that, you don't even need a chest protector to block. So getting a sense of what a guy does from a receiving and a blocking perspective against a college arm, I think is an important part of the evaluation process. And you want to be able to see them handle guys that they're actually going to handle in college. Um, because as good as some coaches are, you have to have some of that stuff in place before you get to campus, right? There's cleanup, there's refinement that happens when you get there. And I think that sometimes that gets lost in the evaluation process is guys don't want to coach. They want that ready-made product. But I still need to see that you can do some stuff against guys that you're going to be catching when you get to the college level.
Yeah, and I think catching is a unique position in college where you really there's a lot of different ways to go about your receiving and blocking per se. There's you have to make it your own. Like I was a guy when I played, like I could pick balls, like especially those spiked fastballs or hard sliders. Like I could pick those balls instead of necessarily having to block them. I'm not advocating for it. It's not easy to do, but it was something that I was capable of doing. And I also had a coaching staff that I played for that allowed me to do that and didn't stifle the like, hey, you have to block all of these balls. If you can go ahead and pick that ball, like go ahead and pick that ball. So I think that you have to make it your own as well. And some guys don't like that, right? Like some guys don't like dudes who can pick. Some guys do. I obviously, because I did it, I liked seeing that in catchers because it to me it showed a little bit more athleticism. But it's not as straightforward as kind of fielding ground balls or reads on fly balls, things like that, where your setup and how you present balls is going to be very unique to yourself and how you go about blocking them and being able to figure out how your body moves to block those things. It's all relative to you. So I think that's important. And again, I think understanding to your point, the high motor and things like that, I think the BP, the baseball IQ to me is a big one too. Understanding flow of the game and, hey, your guy just gave up 3 straight singles. Like you don't have the timeout issue in high school baseball as you do in college. Like call time, walk out to the mound, say something, slow the pace of the game down for your pitcher so that he can take a breath and we can reset and recalibrate into the next at bat and figure out how we can go ahead and limit the damage of what's going on versus just like single, 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 single. Like somebody call time and go to the mound. Like you're in charge. Call time, go to the mound, slow everything down, wait until the umpire comes and gets you. It's okay. Like they'll come get you. They're not going to yell at you. They'll come get you. Hey, it's time to come back to home plate with me. Okay. And then take your time. Mosey your butt on back behind home plate. Take as much time as you need and slow it down so your guy can get a break. And the flip side to that too is like maybe someone's getting loose in the pen. If you go slow it down, that dude might be able to fire up a little bit more and get 4, 5, 6, 7 more pitches in before we even throw another pitch. And now, yeah, that guy gets in trouble, but now he's hot. Instead of being hot in 3 hitters, he's hot in 1, and we can get him in. So it's little things like that start to kind of that can clue you into the baseball IQ and things of that nature for guys to be able to kind of succeed at the next level. And those are hard things for guys to grasp in college. The earlier that you can learn those things and the earlier you can do them and have confidence in doing them, the better it's going to show for you moving forward.
No, the, the feel for the game piece as a catcher, it's really, put it this way, it's really hard to be good without a good catcher. It's really freaking hard to be good without a good catcher. There's not many good teams in college baseball who get by with a guy who's a hack job behind the plate and who doesn't have those qualities because you're an extension of that pitching staff, but you're also a key component of the position group, right? And that's why if you can find yourself a really high end catcher, they're gold, like they're pure gold. And if they're left-handed hitting, they're freaking platinum. And it's why coaches go after those guys. It's why they're so heavily recruited. Like if you can really catch, it's a great way to get yourself into college baseball because there's just not that many guys out there who do it. The one thing that I want to add about this, because I think this is going to become relevant moving forward with the roster restrictions, is I do think athleticism is going to be at a premium at the catcher position. Because if you have a catcher who can do multiple things, if he can go play first base, if he could go run around in the outfield, if he's a good enough bat to DH, with the roster restrictions, having a catcher who has some versatility, I think, is going to be important. And I think it's something that coaches are going to gravitate to is a guy who can catch, but also can stay in the lineup when he doesn't have a glove on. It just extends your roster significantly. And it's something to keep an eye on. It's something that if I was still coaching, it would be something that I would be looking for, specifically in a guy who's like a backup type. You need some versatility there because if all you can do is catch, I'm burning a roster spot on a guy who's not a frontline guy who can't do anything else for me. And when you had 40, you could stash 4 catchers, right? With 34, I don't know if you can carry 4 catchers anymore if all they can do is catch. So I think some positional versatility and some athleticism, I think, is going to be at a premium um, at the catcher position here moving forward. Anything else you want
I
to add
concur.
on the old
No, I mean, I think
catcher
that covers
position?
the basic fundamentals of the generalities of recruiting catchers.
Maybe the last thing to add is that the hit tool is probably the last thing that coaches are trying to check that box, right? There's, you know, you and there's a balance to all of this, right? At certain positions of defense versus offense and how does that profile out? Like at the catcher position, we'll get into middle infielders here soon, specifically shortstops. Like first and foremost, you need to be a really good defender. Period. If you can hit, great. You need to be able to do enough. I think is probably the most important thing, and that's going to vary from program to program, from level to level, not just Division One, but like different levels of Division One. Like, what does a competitive hitter look like in the SEC who can really catch? He might not have to hit 290. He might be a 250 hitter. But if you're 250 and you understand how to move the line and you take good at bats and you can really defend, that probably gets you in the lineup. I think Tennessee had one of those guys last year. Just an outstanding defensive catcher with a ton of presence. Wasn't a huge offensive threat for him, but that guy's value wasn't in his ability to be a great offensive player. It was his ability to manage that staff, manage that team. He was kind of the lifeblood of what they did. And I think that's where the catcher's biggest value is when you've got that gear on, do you make a difference? Anything you get after that, you need to be competitive. If you can get a dude who hits in your 4 hole or your 5 hole who's a catcher, your lineup's probably pretty good. So um, let's move on to some middle infielders here. And you'll probably hear me say this throughout the rest of this podcast, but athleticism is the first thing that guys are going to gravitate to when they're looking at the other positional players. Specifically, we're talking middle guys. We'll start with shortstops. You got to be able to defend. And from a defensive perspective, making the routine play is what's expected, right? In order to be a really good shortstop, you got to be able to do some other stuff. You got to be able to throw from multiple angles. You got to have the prerequisite foot speed, right? There's not a dead set 60 time, but you're not going to find a ton of shortstops in Division One baseball who don't run sub 7. I think that that's a fair assessment. Um, a lot of guys are going to run that 6'6", 6'7" range, and they're probably going to be pretty good left to right. You have to have arm strength, and you have to be an accurate thrower, right? I mean, I think the accuracy piece is across the board in the infield. Like you need to be able to get it over to the first baseman accurately. I think the big separator for shortstops, there's 2 plays. The ball on the run, anything on the run, being really good, being able to charge the baseball, being able to to field the baseball outside of the framework of your body. And then there's that V cut backhand. I don't really worry too much from an evaluation perspective on can you go in the hole and make the freaking Jeter jump throw? Like I'm more worried about can you make the tough out going away from your arm and be able to cut a ball off and have the arm strength necessary to get it across the field. Um, Size wise, like guys are always going to gravitate to bigger physical guys. I do think at shortstop you can get away with some size deficiencies if the defense is really, really good, right? You'll see some 5'9" shortstops, some 5'10" shortstops out there. They're not all going to be like A Rod and be 6'4". Like that's not the norm. But first and foremost, that dude needs to have some life in his body and he needs to be able to show the ability to not just make the routine play, but the ability to go outside of that routine play and convert balls on the ground into outs. Outside of the catcher, the shortstop from an assist perspective, right? In the infield, that dude's gonna convert a lot of ground balls and outs. He's gonna get the most action. That's why typically your best defender in the infield is gonna be your shortstop because that's the dude who's gonna touch the ball the most after the ball hits the ground. Um, so that's where it starts for me. I think the athleticism piece is I don't think I can emphasize it enough. Shortstops at the Division One level or college in general, they're generally your better athletes, and those are the guys that you're leaning on to be really high end defenders. Um, Similar to a catcher, if you want to have a good defensive team, your shortstop needs to be able to catch the ball and convert ground balls into outs very, very frequently.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I think for me, when I was recruiting, it's always great to watch the showcase stuff because it gives you an idea of how they move, which to your point is how athletic guys can be. Um, I always tried to hone in on your first step. If that first step is quick, some of those guys, they can play up their speed a little bit more if they can really get off the ball. When I say get off the ball, I mean when the ball's hit, they're moving to get themselves in position to be able to field that ball. Like, can they get off the ball, or are their feet kind of stuck? And they have to it takes them a split second longer to kind of internalize where they got to go to get themselves in position to make that out. But if they can get off the ball, I think most guys, the vast majority of shortstops are going to run sub 760s. But you can be a 7.0, 7.1 runner, but have a quick first step and get off balls and find success at the college level. I always honed in on the slow roller and the backhand. Anybody can, the vast majority of people can field baseballs that are right at you and go glove side. Those ones are easy. You're kind of ranging out, see what arm strength looks like. But the separator for me was always, can guys go backhand, and then can they go slow roller and throw off the right foot and get guys out and be accurate on the run? Because that's going to happen quite a bit in the college game. And those two things were those three things really, but those two specifically from a fielding standpoint were separators for me. And then obviously arm strength plays a role. I think that you can't discount what arm strength can play up at shortstop, because I think sometimes if you do have if you have a plus arm, it can kind of make up for some deficiencies that you might have for being able to get the balls like that. You might end up turning every ground ball, every backhand into a V cut because it's just easier for you to get there sometimes, or you might just sit back on it and just let it rip. So we had a guy like that at RPI who, he was all of 88 to 91 across the diamond, but he could kind of sit back on some balls that, most shortstops can't, but he could make up for it from an arm strength standpoint at our level. But those are the outliers, but there has to be some semblance of arm strength across the diamond. Generally those guys that don't have the arm strength, you're going to find yourself playing second base. You can defend and do well enough in the infield to hold your own, but you don't have the arm strength to play shortstop. So we're going to flip you over to second base. So I think the athleticism and it'll hold true at all positions, but specifically in the middle of the field, being able to be as athletic as you can possibly be in the middle is generally going to lead you to more wins from a baseball standpoint because you can usually get to more balls. You know, the kind of the catch 22 I will say is sometimes you can be uber athletic in the infield and you might not necessarily have the best fielding percentage, but you might be getting to a hell of a lot more balls than other teams might because you're just that athletic. You know, I think one of the biggest things too for middle guys specifically, and really everybody I should say, is the ability to want the baseball. And I think that there's something to be said about that where, you know, you show up and you show up to watch kids play and they're diving all over the field and they're not clean from a uniform standpoint and they're laying out for everything. It shows you how much they want the baseball in their hands. The other thing I think that does is it inspires a lot more confidence in your arms where it's like, hey, everything that these guys put in play, my guys are laying out trying to get. Like they're fighting their butts off for me to get outs. Like I'm going to do my best to give them balls to be able to field and get us out of these jams. So, you know, I think like the ability to want baseballs and to not be scared to dive or, you know, take a hard slide in at second base. Like I don't know. I always slid hard into second. I feel like most guys appreciated when you know, as long as it's clean, like you're not trying to hurt anybody, but hey man, it's part of the game. Like you're going to go in hard and this is what it is. You know, so I think that it's, you know, you can't shy away from the contact, you can't shy away from the baseball, you know, and you have to be athletic enough to be able to stick in the middle of the field. And, you know, if you know you get to that point, like I think confidence starts to grow. And I think some of the hardest things for younger guys to overcome is, you know, you're going to make errors in this game. That's one of the biggest things that I think I see at the high school level where, you know, guys scream and yell at kids for making errors. Like, yo, physical errors are going to happen. It's how you rebound from them. You know, stick your nose on the next one and get us out of it. It'll be okay. You know, but the ability to turn the page pretty quickly, especially at the college level, is paramount for guys to be able to find success for a long time in college baseball.
Yeah, and I think shortstop's another one for me. The motor is really important. Um, you know, watching. And I think this is important across the board, but for shortstops, the shortstop who kind of half walks out to the field, but in between innings, like it's a turnoff. That guy's got to have some energy. He's next in line from like that defensive captainship behind the catcher, and like that guy's got to have some. He's got to have a good motor. He's got to have some energy. Uh, Getting into like it's not all that tangible, but this is something that I used to try to pay attention to, and I thought it was really important. Is like the level of confidence at which kids attack baseballs. And I think that that can help separate a showcase kid from a kid who can play in the game. Is how comfortable are they attacking hops? How comfortable are they catching the ball outside of the framework of their body? How is the ball impacting their glove? Um, that's stuff that I tried to pay attention to because guys catch your eye in the showcase setting, and that's where it starts usually. Um, but how guys operate in between innings, and then how do they operate from like an internal clock perspective when you need to get the ball across the infield? That'll tell you a lot about can a guy actually defend in game. There's a lot of kids out there right now that are really good at doing drills and are really good at taking fungos. But you get him in a game when there's some pressure on to get the ball over to first base, and a lot of stuff changes. Um, the level of confidence at which guys attack the baseball, the level of confidence in which they throw the ball across the infield. Those are some of the stuff that clue you into that this kid's got a chance to be a good in-game defender. Because you know at shortstop, if you're looking specifically for a shortstop, like it does start with what does he do with a glove on his hand. Um, those high school shortstops who might not quite be as defensive have a really good hit tool. They end up at second or third. It's not to say that third baseman in high school and second baseman in high school don't get recruited to go play in that position, but you're going to notice if you start looking at the higher levels of college baseball and you look at their commitment lists, there's a lot of shortstops in there. because then usually in high school that's your better athletes, and they give you some flexibility, moving guys around the infield. Um, but defensively, it starts first, and I think this is a common thread is as you move to the corners, your bat becomes significantly more important in the evaluation process, right? Where at shortstop, at second base, like those dudes better be able to catch it. Second base has turned into a little bit more of an offensive position, but I don't think it can be understated that being able to glove it there, being really good on the pivot, um, is an important piece of the puzzle in terms of what coaches are looking at. But anytime you're on the dirt, your ability to defend is really, really valuable. And you can impact games at shortstop without getting hit. You can convert 7 ground balls into outs and go 0 for 3 at the plate, and you still can play a really good game. Um, you start getting into the outfield, you start playing on the corners, you don't touch the ball as much, so your impact on the game is going to be a little bit more reliant on what you do with a bat in your hands. But that shortstop position, that second base position, uh, first and foremost, you need to be able to defend it there. And I think that that's what coaches are going to hone in on first. And then we're going to determine, do you have the offensive skill set required to be competitive at our level? Um, at least that's how I used to view it. If you're going to play in the middle of the field, I need to know that you're going to convert balls into outs and that we can figure out where you fit offensively. And a lot of times those guys are more skilled and it just takes them some time to get a little bit stronger to be a little bit better of an offensive player. I know we had Traz on here talking about Zach Shank, who was a Maris shortstop who ended up making it to AAA. That he was a below average offensive player when he first got there, but he was a fantastic defender and he kind of grew into being a really good offensive player because he had time to develop, he had time to take some at bats, he had time to get a little bit stronger. But when you're in the middle of the field, specifically when you're on the dirt, your ability to catch the baseball and accurately throw the baseball, those are two things that really aren't negotiable if you're going to play that position in college. Like I said, you might be a little bit of a below average defender at the college level for a shortstop, probably going to end up at third base if you're going to be able to swing it enough. Um, but in the middle, that defensive piece can't be overlooked.
No. And I also think it's important to note that not every high school shortstop is a college shortstop. Like, kind of what you're saying in that you can move people, but like that's just because you play shortstop on your high school team or your high school travel team doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bona fide shortstop at the next level. There's a lot more that goes into it. And I think that doesn't mean that you can't get recruited, doesn't mean you can't play, but like the idea that, just because you play shortstop at your high school, you're a shortstop at the next level. Most guys are trying to recruit athletes and then figure out where it's going to kind of fall into place from there.
Yeah. And, when you start looking at like profiling your corner guys, your third basemen, your first basemen, even that's gotten different in recent years where the big donkey at first base who can only hit, you got high school shortstops moving over to first base these days. Um, High school third basemen are going to be college first baseman type of things, and that guy over at first base, it's not just a big lug who can bang anymore. That guy needs to be at least a competitive defender, because that dude is going to touch the ball a lot. So I think that the game has changed a little bit with that, where with the athleticism really at the forefront of the evaluation process, and then based on your tool set, based on how you perform offensively, based on how you're scoping out the lineup for a particular team, you start to figure out where your defenders fit really well. But if you're going to play third at the next level, there's an arm strength requirement for sure. Um, there's a level of toughness to be able to put your nose on a ball. You can't be Roger Dorn it and just Olay and everything. So there's a certain level of toughness that I think is required to play third base at a high level. But you're basically getting a slightly slower shortstop at third base these days. Probably a little bit more physical, probably a little bit more offensive in some regards. But third base is a defensive position for sure, and it's something that guys need to be able to be able to function at a high level with a glove on their hand at third base. They need to be able to make some of those tough throws. It's a longer throw typically, but that first step quickness is really important. Like you kind of hit on it earlier, that like you might not be a 6'6" runner, but if you're really good off the jump and that first step's really good, if you're really good at taking the proper angles, I think that those matter a ton at third base, and it can make or break a really good defender. Is how good is that first step, not only from an explosiveness perspective, but are you efficient in the angles that you're taking, right? Because that drop step play is a funky play to make if you haven't had to make it a lot in high school, and it's something that at the playing third base at a high level, being able to open up that left foot or being able to drop that right foot just to give yourself a little bit of space is a big adjustment for kids. And that first step quickness and that first step efficiency in terms of the angles you're taking is something that if you're looking to profile a guy at third base at the next level, that's something that coaches are going to be looking at. Um, but yeah, tool set's important. And I think your bat, if you're going to get evaluated as a guy who's going to play at third base in the next level, your ability to be impactful offensively is is going to play a significant role in your evaluation. It's a little bit more of an offensive position. Some programs are going to do it a little bit different depending on how your lineup is structured, but typically that third baseman is going to be a little bit more offensive.
Yeah, I think the first baseman point that you made is huge. I think there's a lot of people who have kind of moved towards recruiting shortstops or third basemen and moving them over to first, from the standpoint of, you can go look at any record at any program in the country, and generally speaking, the top 4 or 5 are going to be first basemen from a fielding standpoint because they touch the ball so much. So like if that position is going to handle the ball as much as they do, why not have somebody over there who's that pretty athletic and can handle, not only being able to field the ball, but bad throws, and being able to have good feet to make decisions on what they have to do instead of just kind of being locked in concrete with a guy who is a left-handed banger, and doesn't necessarily help you a whole hell of a lot from a defensive standpoint. It's not to say it doesn't happen anymore, because it certainly still does, but I think the profile of who's playing first base in college baseball nowadays has certainly changed over the last 5 to 7 years from what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Third baseman, same thing. I think that they're getting more athletic at third. It is becoming a little bit more of an offensive position, but I do think that from the college game specifically, the premium that's set on defense for teams to have success, you still have to be able to defend at third base, which is why you're seeing, athletic shortstops being put over at third base. They might not necessarily be able to do it at short, but they can do it at third. I think you have to be better than average offensively, but I also think that there are teams out there that can live with a third baseman who is going to go hit 270, but be dynamite with the glove, and not necessarily, be a lockdown third baseman, which, is hard to do in an era with, a lot of offensive bangers from a college baseball standpoint. We had a guy I think he graduated in 2017 or 18 from RPI, JT Sawyer. He played third base damn near every game of his entire career. A little unassuming, one of my favorite players I've ever coached. Shout out JT. Carl, who told at the time had been coaching for like 33 years, told me he was the best third baseman he ever had. But he could throw on the run. He played even with the bag, no matter who was up, no matter what was going on. And I think he made like 6 errors in his entire career. And I would argue that like 3 of them were not necessarily his errors. But he hit 280 for us, but like it was a lockdown third base where pretty much anything hit there, like it was an out, and that helped you win a lot of games. And I think that's yes, it is an offensive position, especially at the higher levels, but I think there's a premium on defense that's coming because you can't just have a guy who is same thing at first. You can't just have a guy who can bang in at third and not be able to field it because you're climbing pitch counts, guys are throwing harder, their pitch counts are shorter. You got to be able to keep these guys in the game as long as you possibly can. So you need to have the defense on the other side to make sure that you're keeping those guys in the game for as long as you possibly need them for, and not giving away 2 3 outs a game because we're sacrificing some defense for some semblance of offense at a corner position in the infield.
No, it's an interesting thing to think about because I do think that finding offense these days is a lot easier, right? There's a lot of guys who can hit. There's fewer guys that you feel confident they can go out and really play defense. And to your point, at the end of the day, baseball is a run prevention sport. Like you're seeing it play out in the first weekend of college baseball. Like free bases, give up free bases, lose baseball games. It's really that simple. And if you can catch the ball cleanly and you don't give that team other opportunities, um, you got a really good chance of being able to win a bunch of games. And guys who can defend and are athletic, I think, have a leg up on a lot of the competition because a lot of times the offensive component, you can close the gap by just getting stronger, right? And learning how to manage in a bag, getting with a good coach type of thing. But those guys who can really defend, I think they have a ton of value in the recruiting process, especially for programs and coaches that kind of understand how this all comes together and really value the ability to convert batted balls into outs. Those guys, uh, they're really valuable. Like you look at some of the programs that are routinely at the top of college baseball, and I had a front row seat to watching how they did it at UVA while I was at William and Mary. They had a team full of shortstops, and one of their hallmarks is they could always really defend, right? They're super offensive too, but you look at them and how they're built, and they're built athletic and they're built to be able to play defense. And um, if you're an infielder or a guy who's going to play infield in college, I don't think I can stress enough that your ability to catch the ball and get the ball over to first base effectively and be able to make some of those more athletic plays, I think it's a piece of the puzzle that is really important from an evaluation standpoint. Because there are a lot of guys that can swing the bat. I think there's fewer guys that defensively are really good and have the ability to transition to the college game immediately because they're comfortable with the glove on their hand. So something to think about, something to understand that coaches are going to look at. And obviously the barrier to entry at different programs, like what a defensive third baseman looks like in the SEC is going to be a lot different than the guy who's in the MAC. Um, but at the end of the day, being able to convert batted balls into outs is kind of the core of what this game is. Um, so I don't think it can be overlooked.
No, and
Outfielders
you
go.
said it at the top too. Like we're speaking in generalities, and it's going to be like these are some hard and true things that are going to be that'll play out to be true over the course of the recruiting process for a lot of people. But each and every individual program and coaching staff is going to put a higher premium on whatever it is that they want, right? Like some programs are going to want a defensive third baseman, others are going to want an offensive one. Same thing at first. Your corners are a little bit more of the first, third, right, left are a little bit more of your kind of what's the flavor that the coaching staff wants. Like, do you want guys who can bang it and play average defense, or are you looking for guys who play above average defense and you'll sacrifice a little bit of offense? And if we get one who can play high level defense and bang it, whew, now we're cooking with oil, baby. But my point is that it's like that type of stuff is all going to be left up to individual programs.
Yep. No, absolutely. Outfielders. I don't know. This one for me is pretty simple.
Catch the ball.
Can you run and can you hit? The guys who can really run and track the ball go to center field. The next best defender plays right. Your worst defender in the outfield usually plays left. But for me, can you run and do something offensively that's a game changer, right? Is your speed? Do you have power? Do you have really good bat to ball skills? Like, what does that look like? I think at the end of the day, if you're an outfielder, you need to be able to hit, then you need to be able to run and cover ground, right? Not to not to say that being a good defensive outfielder is easy because it's not. There's definitely big gaps between a really good outfielder and an average outfielder in terms of the ground they can cover, their ability to track the ball. But like fundamentally, you're going to play college baseball and you're going to play in an outfield position. Uh, Ideally, you do both, but you better to be able to do one or the other. Not a lot of 7-5 runners floating around college baseball outfields these days. Most guys are good runners and have the ability to track the baseball. For me, the throw tool was never a huge piece of the puzzle for me. I think it's a luxury. Um, yeah, it's great to have a right fielder who can get you some assists, but that wasn't make or break for me. As long as you had enough arm strength to get the ball to the guys that we wanted to have the ball in their hand, the shortstops, the second basemen. Um, that wasn't a huge turnoff for me. I think that it's one of those tools that if all things are equal, you take the guy who throws better. Um, but if you got a guy who can really run and really hit and he's just an average thrower, um, that was never a turnoff for me. I know some guys nitpick on that, but to me, it's kind of like catching. Um, like those other tools matter way more to me because I think that there's other ways to make up for it by good positioning and being able to get the ball to where it's supposed to go, versus being able to make those highlight throws like Mookie Betts or Ichiro or Raul Mondesi,
Vlad
um,
Guerrero.
Vlad. Those guys are great, and like that's a game changer when you have a guy who can do that. But I think at the end of the day, if you were going to ask most college coaches when you're evaluating outfielders, what's the least important tool? They'll probably tell you, like, I don't, not really hung up on how good of a thrower they are. They need to be good enough, I think, is what most coaches would tell you. They need to be good enough. And anything after that is, for me, is really a bonus. But can you run? Can you take good routes and catch the balls that you're supposed to catch? And not most importantly, but like that bat tool is going to be a difference maker. A lot of high school infielders end up in the outfield in college. Um, but looking for physical athletes who have some offensive upside is kind of where it always started with me with outfielders.
Yeah, you want the athleticism. You want guys who, especially in center, you want guys who can go get the baseball. Speed. Your corner guys you can live with. Maybe not necessarily being the best, but you want them to be able to bang it offensively for you. I think that the I'm in the same boat as you from a throwing standpoint. I think especially nowadays with the ability to build arm strength, it's not necessarily a deal. It was never a deal breaker for me because we can put you on a throwing program plus put some weight on you to get you to throw the ball a little bit better. If it's a little bit of a broken arm action, then, I might shy away from it. But, if it's a clean arm action and it's just not a whole lot of velo there, like we have things in place where we can kind of build that stuff up where if you check the other boxes of being able to run, being able to take good reads and being offensive, then, we can work with not necessarily having the best arm strength. And I think, and this holds true in a lot of things. Like you can go watch a lot of college baseball, and I was uber aggressive as a third base coach. Like, there's so much that has to go right to get outfield assists, especially in the college game. Like you got to field it, you got to be able to throw it, you got to be accurate with your throw. The other guy has to catch it. You still got to make a tag. There's so much that goes on. It's true in at any level, but I think it's you could be an unbelievable thrower, but you might not have a ton of outfield assists because you might not be the most accurate. Like you're going to get tested, and I think the throw piece for me is not necessary. I think it's more a reason to cross guys off that coaches don't necessarily love than it is something that is really a red flag. Now, is there a barrier to entry? Yeah. If you're gonna from right field, you can't make it to the infield dirt in the air. Like you probably don't have the requisite skills to be able to play the outfield in the college game. But I think I was way more in the camp of foot speed. How much ground can we cover? Because the more ground we can cover in the outfield, the more hits or potential hits we can take away, the more outs we can get from that standpoint. To where I don't necessarily want a bunch of guys who run a 7-2, 7-3, 7-4 in the outfield. Like I'm looking for guys that are sub sevens that can go get baseballs and keep us in, especially in our yard. So it's for me, it was always athleticism, speed, and then my corner guys, I want to be able to bang it. And I think the other thing too, especially with the roster crunch and stuff, and what I always like to do is like I like to have, it's kind of like your shortstops, right? Like I like to recruit a lot of center fielders and then move them. I like the versatility of where like, okay, I if I have to late in the game, I can, if I remove one of our outfielders because we have a defensive outfielder who, is really, really good, but not defensively, but not great offensively, I can slide, I can put him in center and slide our center fielder over to right or slide him over to left or however it might be. Or, God forbid you end up having injuries in game or even during the season. I like the versatility of like, okay, I have more than just one guy who can play center field for us. And, in a pinch, we have two or three guys who can go get it in center. And like, I can live with hiding somebody over here in left for a couple games to keep it going because now I can slide my left fielder over to center or over to right, however it might be. I think outfield is one where you can get a little bit more specific on the type of field you play on. Like at RPI, we had a super short porch in right. It was 300 down the line with a double with like a 30-foot fence. Like that's a tricky kind of field to play if you're not used to it and don't necessarily know how to do it. So like you can kind of recruit to your field a little bit. Like when we played at Marist, it was like 415 to center. Like we needed a center fielder who could go get it because if he got over his head, like we're in trouble. So I think you can get a little bit more field specific sometimes on from a recruiting standpoint from a with outfielders with the type of field you play on. Because if you're a super shallow field, if you're 390 to center and 360 in the gaps and 320 down the lines, like you got a super tight outfield, like you could probably get away with not necessarily having to be the fastest and get some guys that can bang because it's not if you're playing a lot of games at home, right? So I think it's a little bit different from a recruiting standpoint there where you can kind of that can come into play a little bit more than like shortstop man, like it doesn't matter what field you're playing on. When you're playing in the infield or behind the plate, it's still the same. But outfield can get a little different just because of the type of field that you might be playing on the majority of the time where that might come into play a little bit. But I don't think it's something that moves the needle a whole lot where people look at it like, he can't play left field in our field. But you might be able to kind of take a risk on a guy here or there where it's like, yeah, you know what, it's only 300 to right field for us, and he can really bang it. And he's left-handed, and we can play him on the warning track, and if it's over his head, it's off the wall or it's gone. So as long as he can run in on the ball and catch it, we're good. So things like that can kind of come into play at from the outfield standpoint, but again, that's going to be program specific and kind of field dependent on that type of thing. But overall, you're looking for guys who can run. You're looking for guys who can who get great reads, and can add value to your team offensively. And I agree with you. I think the throw tool from an outfielder, like while yeah, it looks awesome. Like, how many outfield assists are out there in the college game every year? I don't know, but I would venture a guess to say that the vast majority, like, are you going to have guys that have outfield assists? All yeah, you're gonna, but the vast majority, like, it's not like guys are throwing out 15, 16 guys a year from the outfield.
Now you bring up a good point about your field configuration and how you recruit to it because I think the broader conversation here plays into that as well, right? You might recruit more left-handed hitters, although everybody wants left-handed hitters, but you might recruit certain types of hitters with certain traits because of the field you play at. To your point, you play in a really big outfield, you're probably more inclined to get guys who can really run. Um, Smaller park, you might be willing to give a little bit on the run tool for exactly that reason that like, hey, he's gonna get us more runs offensively than he's gonna give up defensively because of the way our park's set up and he fits from an offensive standpoint. Um, but you know, that's that's very nuanced, but I think it's something that people should be aware of in like terms of how you fit. Like you might get recruited at one program and not another that seem to be equals, but one school might like you because you just happen to fit what they do a little bit better. They might value what you're good at a higher level than another program will. And there's some schools that do not waver on certain traits, and I think that's important to understand too. Because they have the ability to be so selective with who they recruit that they don't have to budge on any of those type of traits. But everybody recruits slightly different stuff. I will say that I think the one common theme is being physical and being athletic are the two things that coaches are going to hone in on first, right? Do you have some foot speed? Do you have the prerequisite physicality? Do you have the arm speed in order to do certain things at a high level? What that looks like for different programs is going to be, it's different across the board, but the physicality in college baseball has gone up significantly. Looking good in a uniform is a great place to start. It shows you probably been in the weight room, shows that you probably got some genetic stuff that helps you out. But being physical and being able to run are two really good places to start if you're trying to get recruited. If you've got those two things, you're going to catch somebody's eye. Because at the end of the day, I think athleticism trumps a lot of things in this, especially with coaches who feel like they can coach and develop. Um, yeah, if you swing and miss at everything over 85 miles an hour, I don't really care how fast you run if you're playing right field. But if you can really run and you've got a ton of bat speed, and I see I feel like I can help you develop a little bit offensively. Like you're a piece of clay that's a lot more easily moldable than the kid who's 5'9", 150 pounds and doesn't have the strength necessary in order to be successful or the athleticism necessary to be successful. So if you want to make yourself recruitable, regardless of the position you play, I think being strong, being fast, and being able to defend, like those are the three places I think that are really important because there's a lot of guys out there who can hit, and like you certainly need to be able to hit, but I think you can separate yourself if you check those other boxes.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've said this numerous times on here. I think we've de emphasized the importance of being able to defend at a high level. And I think the guys who can defend at a high level are the ones that find themselves in really good positions from a recruiting standpoint. And also, you can find yourself in the lineup a lot sooner. I think the only thing I would, you know, I think in some regards it holds true. I'm going to push back a tiny bit on when you recruit to your field. Like, I know I said it. I think it matters a little bit more defensively than it does. Obviously, offensively, it matters if you play, you get a short porch to right. But I think it matters more where like what school you're being recruited by, or really the program it is that thinks about it. Because if you're a Northeast school, I mean, how many home games are you playing? You know what I mean? Like if you're playing in the MAC, like you're playing maybe I counted some of the schools in the MAC. Like you're playing 14 to 20 games at home. Like, does that move the needle that like you're gonna recruit a guy because yeah, we got a short porch to write. Like, I get it if you're playing like if you're in the South and you're playing 35 games at home, sure. Like, yeah, that can move the needle. But before the season starts, you got 15 games scheduled at home. Like you're going to set your whole recruiting basis around your home field. It just doesn't make sense. You're playing so many on the road, and then you're going to get whacked from a rain standpoint. you know, I get it if you're, hey, if you're the University of Rochester and you're Coach Reyna, like, yeah, you have turf, you have lights, you're playing a lot more games at home, you have a short porch in right center. Like, yeah, I get making that decision. But if you're only going to play, if you're scheduled to play 20 games at home and you play 56, like 36 of them are on the road. And that's if, you don't have turf and you don't get washed. Like you might play 12 games at home. Are you really going to set your recruiting rules around 12 games? Maybe. Like it just doesn't make sense to me, at least. I'm not saying it doesn't, because it does in some regards, but I think it's more dependent on where you are in the geography of the United States of America versus being a hard and fast rule. But I think defensively it can play a little bit more of a role if you have some unique setups in your field than it can necessarily offensively. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
No, I think that's it, but it's important to note that yeah, you're having a left-handed hitter to take advantage of a short right field porch at your yard to play 14 games there probably doesn't move the needle as much as if you're at, name whatever school down south and they play 35 home games. It's like, well, yeah, maybe it's more significant to try to find guys who can take advantage of that setup. Um, but no, it's an interesting thing. It'd be interesting to ask, and maybe we'll just call some guys that have kind of unique setups and be like, well, how do you recruit to this? Is this something that you consider? And then some guys probably say no, and some guys will probably tell you like, yeah, because of our field and the amount of home games we play, we recruit a certain type of player because it's going to help us get to where we need to go in the long run.
Right. And I don't know. I should probably ask Joe. I've never asked him in the integrity that I've known him. But you've played there. Like it's a super short gap to left center, and then
Where's
right center. What?
where's this?
Rochester.
Yeah,
They're like super short to left center, like 320, and then right center's like the polo grounds. Like I would imagine that you go gap to gap, like you're recruiting more gap to gap guys. Whereas like you go pole side down the line at Rochester, like if you've ever seen their field, there's a road that runs behind it. It's like 370 down the line. It comes into 320 and then goes back out to like 490. Like you do some damage if you go gap to gap there, where like you could have a couple bolts that you hit 340 into the gap that they're doubles everywhere else, but they're home runs there. And you can have some inside the park home runs when you go, backside doubles in the gap because you're just running for days and days and days and days.
I know he's specific. I based on the teams that he's run out there, and I would be curious to see what Joe said. But I think there's a reason he tries to get well above average runners to play right in center field there
Yeah.
for that reason, because that right field is, Joe's not a big fan of dudes who don't run like 6'7" to play in the outfield for
Yeah.
him.
Because you got to
For
cover
that
a lot of
exact
ground there.
reason. Yeah,
Yeah.
because he needs guys who can play defense out there.
But that's where I think it plays more defensively
Yeah,
in those spots than it
yeah,
does necessarily offensively.
yeah. And speed plays everywhere too. But if you
But
play at a
again,
ballpark,
we're getting a little off topic here talking about Joe, but he'll love when this comes out. But like it's all like they have turf, they have lights, they're always playable. There's a decent chance that you're playing a lot more games at home than you necessarily are on the road.
valid point. Shout out Joe. Good luck coming up here. Um, I mean, I think we covered it pretty good. If anybody listening has like very specific questions on like specific positions, and they want us to dive into that, like feel free to reach out to us on social media. But um, the evaluation process is going to be different from program to program, level to level, levels within levels. Um, but I think we hit on some of the kind of the consistent takeaways, the consistent things that our coaches are looking for from a skill perspective. from a compete perspective, a motor perspective. I think we hit on those with catcher and shortstop. Um, and some of the things that these guys are looking for. I mean, at the end of the day, that in-game performance, your ability to compete against other players who are going to play in college, that's where coaches are going to really start to evaluate you beyond your skill set, right? You do need to see some results,
Right.
right? So beating up on a 76-mile-an-hour right-hander in your high school league and hitting 400, that's great, and it's expected of a guy who's going to play in college. But coaches are going to be more concerned with what are you doing when you're facing a guy who's a college level type of pitcher? How do you handle yourself in those situations? How do you handle yourself as a shortstop against guys who can run down the line, right? What happens to you when things get sped up? Um, so outside of the physical piece, that performance aspect of it and what you actually do when the lights are on is going to be the big separator. But in order to get on somebody's radar, I think we touched on quite a bit of the information that coaches are going to sift through and how they're going to start to identify guys and get to the point where they can make a decision on whether a guy's a fit or not.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, it's all of this stuff is stuff that is going to get you noticed. What will get you recruited is your ability to do all this stuff in the context of the game. When the lights are on and you're competing, that's what's going to ultimately get you recruited. There's a lot of guys out there that are, really, really good in showcases where they can defend in a showcase and they can hit in a showcase, but, when the lights are on and they play the game, they can't do it. Conversely, there's guys who, just look average, who go out there and are really good in game and things like that. So, I'm glad you mentioned that like the all of the stuff we mentioned are things that are going to get you noticed and get your foot in the door from a recruiting standpoint. What you do in game is ultimately what's going to get you recruited overall to programs.
Well said. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Tune in next week. And as always, if you have topics you want us to cover or just general questions that we can cover in a shorter format, don't hesitate to reach out, email, Twitter, or X, sorry, Elon, Instagram. Happy to discuss anything that anybody wants to hear. But until next week, thanks everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.